Good afternoon, football fans, and welcome to another episode of Sports Talk with Rags here in Season 3, Episode 16. And today here we are joined here by former college football coach of Tulane and Clemson, Tommy Bowden. Coach Bowden, how you doing today?
Good afternoon. Hope things are going well.
Oh yes, things are going great. Well, hey, let's start at the beginning. I mean, your uh, your your time around the game of football with what what your dad did. I mean, definitely been around the game of football there as you played at West Virginia there from 73 to 76.
Yeah, that's kind of all I knew was football, even before going back before I played at West Virginia. High school, hanging around and seeing my father coach, even before that. So I've always been around it, but I got the opportunity to play for my father at West Virginia. Then he left, and I played for the new head coach for a year. Then as soon as I got through playing Rags, I immediately went into college coaching,
Right.
student assistant, graduate assistant, but have always been around it. One thing about my father, he really never encouraged or discouraged us to go into coaching. He let us make our own decision, but that's the path that I chose.
Right, and a graduate assistant. I mean, that's just a way that you could work on your masters and get your feet wet here with getting involved with coaching.
Yeah, that's I really started out as a student assistant,
Oh,
and by that, I was finishing I finished playing in December or November, and
right,
then went back to spring to finish school. But they started hanging around the football office. Said, "Hey, what can I do?"
right.
And that particular time, at Morgantown, our prospects flew into Pittsburgh. So I'd have to drive up to Pittsburgh to pick up a prospect. We got our film back in. We filmed. We didn't tape them or video it. We filmed it. So we got our film processed in Pittsburgh. So after spring ball, I'd take the film and drive it to Pittsburgh, get it developed, and drive it back. And from a student assistant to a graduate assistant, you get paid. Student assistant, you get paid nothing.
Right.
Graduate assistant, you get paid virtually nothing.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And then there was an opportunity for you to go there to Tallahassee and be on your dad's staff there in the 78, 79.
Yeah, I had a chance to stay at West Virginia as a graduate assistant, and my father had told me, he said, if you want to be marketable in coaching, there's two positions you need to coach. One would be offensive line, which I didn't have any background. The other was the secondary. Offensive line, you coach 5 guys. Secondary, you coach 4. Those are the guys that are most marketable. It takes a really good coach to coordinate, multiple players as opposed to a tight end or a running back or quarterback. So I had a chance to stay at West Virginia and work for a young new secondary coach they were bringing in for Syracuse, or go to Florida State and work for an experienced defensive coordinator that had been around. So
Right.
The young guy coming in from Syracuse was a guy named Nick Saban.
Oh,
So actually, guys, I want to go work for a good coach.
right.
I went to Florida State and worked for another guy that had more experience. And at that time, Nick was, only a couple of years old. He's probably 26, and I was 23. But once I started my coaching as a part-time volunteer graduate assistant at Florida State after I left West Virginia.
Yes, yes, and then went to Auburn, came back to Florida State, and then there in the mid '80s had a stop at Duke, and then also an assistant there at Alabama there from '87 to '89.
Yeah, I left Duke. My head coach, a guy named Steve Sloan, that actually played quarterback at Alabama, was MVP in the Orange Bowl. He left the head coaching job at Duke to become the athletic director at Alabama. So I was out of a job. The head coach leaves, you're looking. So had an opportunity to go to Alabama to coach wide receivers, and I coached a young whippersnapper named Dabo Sweeney he was a walk-on wide receiver, and then stayed there for 3 years before I left there and went to Kentucky to be the offensive coordinator.
Yes, and then you did work for your dad but then there in the early '90s, got to uh, got to work on your brother's staff there at Auburn.
Yeah, yeah, I did that. I went to Auburn 1990 as offensive coordinator with a guy named Pat Dye.
Yeah,
He retired in after 1 or 2 years, and I think 2 years. Then my brother became the head coach, so I stayed on with him. Thank goodness he kept me. I called my mother. I called my mother and said, "Make him keep me, please."
right,
Make him. He's my younger brother. He's a year and a half younger than I am, but
right.
he went undefeated his first year at Auburn, 1993. I stayed for about 5 or 6 years, offensive coordinator, then had an opportunity to go to Tulane as the head coach.
Yes, and excuse me, to piggyback on that, I mean, your head coach there at Tulane, conference USA, and won a championship there in '98.
Yeah, two coaches before me was a guy named Mac Brown, who's now at North Carolina. But Mac had won, I think in his fifth year, he won 6 or 7 games at Tulane and got the head coaching job at North Carolina. So when I took the job, I said, gosh, if I could win 6 or 7, maybe I could use that to catapult to a little bit a bigger job like he did.
Right.
And ended up winning 7 our first year. I inherited a guy named Buddy Tevens was the head coach before I was, and inherited some pretty good players. Went undefeated my second year, and it just so happens that Clemson was open, a place I'd always been interested in, and they were interested in me, so we kind of hooked up. But first year won 7, second year won 12, went 12-0. And you got to be, coaching. You got to be at the right place at the right time. We have to go undefeated,
Right.
and a good job came open. So it was a good time to be the head coach at Tulane, go undefeated.
Yes, and with going to Clemson, I mean, yes, you've played for your dad at West Virginia. You've been on your dad's staff, but then with getting a head coach at Clemson, now you're in the same conference, and now you're going to play against your dad's team.
Yeah, at that time, Rags, Florida State at that time that I went to Clemson was what Clemson is now.
Right.
Clemson's dominated that conference. Florida State was dominating the conference. He had 14 top 5 finishes, which is a record, NCAA record. I don't know if it'll ever be beat. The first year I played him, 1999, he was a national champion, went undefeated. So, but a father and son had never played my first year, and ESPN televised it, called the Bowden Bowl. He beat me 17-14. I was ahead 14-3 at halftime. I said, "Man alive! I won 3 games last year. They did at Clemson. I'm gonna beat the old man my first year." Then he came out, kicked the field goal late, beat us 17-14, and he won the first 4. Played 9 times. I won the last 4 out of 5, but had some great games, and they were really, really, really good battles.
Yes, and in 2003, I mean, with doing some research here prior to this episode, I saw that you hired a wide receiver coach back to Dabo Sweeney, who had been out of football there as he was an assistant there at Alabama, was out of football for a couple years.
Yeah, I really did. Had a chance to hire him. I interviewed 2 people. I lost a really good recruiter, a guy named Rick Stockstill, that is now the head coach at Middle Tennessee, and has done a really, really good job. He was a great recruiter, had recruited some great players at Clemson. So I was really trying hard to replace somebody that had a track record as a recruiter. And one thing Dabo did at Alabama is he had a great track record, a really impressive resume on guys that he had signed. So ended up hiring him that year, and he had a really productive career at Clemson as an assistant recruiting. And one of the things I quickly learned in coaching, Rags, that team of the best players usually wins.
Right.
So the key was, who can get the best players, but everybody wants the best players. So it's very competitive, and Dabo kind of helped us get over the hump, signing some really good players at Clemson.
Yeah, and then also that 2003 season, yes, you did beat your dad, but then with being a Clemson head coach, you also play that in-state rival from Columbia. And at the time, Lou Holtz was coaching South Carolina. So there in 2003, two of your wins was against legendary college football coaches. One, your dad, and then with you guys beating South Carolina, beating a Lou Holtz led team.
Yeah, and I was lucky because after Lou Holtz, Steve Spurrier took over. So, sometimes you get lucky and your rival coach is struggling and they're not very good coaches. And it's my luck in the 9 years we played, 5 of them were against the Hall of Fame Lou Holtz and 3 of them were against the Hall of Fame Steve Spurrier. So they made my job more difficult, which you don't really like as a head coach. But we had some great games. It's a very intense rivalry. Anytime you coach football in a state like
Right.
South Carolina or like Alabama that doesn't have pro sports,
Right.
don't have pro sports, and then college rivalry is elevated to a really intense level. And that's kind of the way it was at South Carolina, between Clemson and South Carolina. But 2 really, really quality coaches in Lou Holtz and Steve Spurrier. And I think we ended up, my 9 years, I think we ended up winning 7 out of the 9.
Right. Yes. And, while you were at Clemson, the ACC expanded, and then, 2 divisions, conference championships, there in the first weekend in December. So, you were at a time there at Clemson where the ACC was growing and to, just about where every conference now has a conference championship there at the end of the regular season.
Yeah, when I played in West
Right.
Virginia, Rags, it was the 10 game schedule. That was it. No championship game. Then it went to 11 as soon as I got into coaching. Went to
Right.
Clemson, it went to 12. Then it went to a championship game. Of course, now it's gone to 14 playoff and quickly an 18 playoff. But yeah, it's the season has been extended. But when I went to Clemson, we played 8 conference games, and then we played 3 out of conference games for an 11 game schedule. And
Right.
then they added all those teams, the Miami, Virginia Tech, Pittsburgh, Boston College. They added all those newcomers, and then we went to a 12 game conference and went to a championship game where there's I think 14 teams, 7 in each division. But it's really changed. It's changed college football, and the reason for that is money. Every ways which ways can you make money? And surely the expanding conferences, going to championship game, playing more games, then going to 14 playoffs and now 18 playoff.
Right. And then also, I know with you being a West Virginia grad, I looked to see when West Virginia went in the Big East, and that was the early 90s. So West Virginia was a long time independent. And then when your dad went to Florida State, they didn't go to the ACC until 92. So they were an independent. Now it's a very small percentage where schools are an independent, and just about everybody's associated with a conference with contract with postseason bowls.
Yeah, I think it's really going to create a natural division. Unfortunately, there's about 131 maybe Division 1A teams. There's the Power 5, then the Group of 5, everybody else. And unfortunately, I think the Power 5, about 60 schools is what it is. About half of the Division 1A schools I think they're going to eventually pull away from the NCAA, get their own commissioner, find some kind of limitations on the NIL and the transfer portal, and become a kind of a mini NFL, but with some academic requirements. And
Yeah.
I think that's the way we're headed. And
Right.
I think you're going to see a further division between the Power 5 and Group of 5 schools.
Right. Well, while you were at Clemson, you got named coach of the ACC Coach of the Year in 99 and 03. But talk about being recognized by Fellowship of Christian Athletes, being named Football Coach of the Year there in 2006.
The Fellowship of Christian Athletes is something I was interested in. I attended when I was a college player. My father has always been actively involved in that Christian kind of resource for college athletes. And then I'd always been, when I coached at Auburn and Alabama and Kentucky and Duke and all these places, had always been the staff liaison between the local Fellowship of Christian Athletes organization and our football program. And then when I became a head coach, stayed actively involved I'm fixing to fly out Monday to speak to a couple of FCA fundraisers. That's probably what I do more now than anything is I speak at Fellowship of Christian Athletes fundraisers. So it's been an organization I've always been associated with, and I think if you give enough money to them, they'll recognize you as Coach of the Year. So that's usually the way it goes. You got to give a lot of money, then they give you an award. But I'm honored to get it.
Right. Well, hey, after coaching, you did a little bit of broadcasting, right?
Yeah, I did that for 8 or 9 years, and it's. I can tell you this, Rags, it's a lot easier than coaching. Yeah, TV. But I enjoyed that. I was lucky to have 2 studio jobs. I didn't have to fly from site to site to site. So I'd fly and did a show in Atlanta for Fox Sports about 5 years. The ACC, both of them, Fox and Atlanta, was starting a college program, a college which they didn't have, and then the ACC was going to start a college football which they did not have. So kind of got in on the ground floor on both of those shows and ended up doing the ACC one for about 8 or 9 years. And then when they signed with ESPN, I think they hired a guy named Mark Richt who had just left Georgia. It's very competitive. It's a competitive industry like anything else. So now I do most of speaking, got grandsons and all that stuff. Kind of entertains your time.
Yeah, well, I know that my wife and I, we met you when you came to speak at our church there, Liberty Live there in Hampton on Super Bowl Sunday. So, do you besides speaking at FCA fundraisers and other churches, do you do more go to other churches and speak these days?
Yeah, and other avenues. A lot of men's conferences I do. I'm speaking Saturday up in South Carolina at a kickoff for area crusade. I'm flying back up to South Carolina, speak at a Christian high school graduation. Speaking out Iowa at a Christian business organization. Texas at a men's conference. So I fly different parts of the country, but a lot of them are FCA, a lot of them are churches, a lot of them are men's conferences, a lot of them are Christian businesses, high school graduation. So different, anything faith-based, I do, and I enjoy it. My father did that I think my father did that too. He was 89 and health wouldn't allow him anymore.
Right. Yeah, and I mean there at Florida State, your dad had a long coaching career there at Florida State. Well, then my brother Mike Ragsdale there in '89, he went to a baseball camp there at Florida State, and Mike Martin had a long time career there at Florida State baseball. So definitely a lot of consistency there in the '80s, '90s, the early 2000s there with Florida State football with your dad and Florida State baseball there with Mike Martin.
Yeah, I can remember Mike Martin. It seems like there was a guy before him named Dick Hauser. He left Florida State, become the head coach of Kansas City Royals. Yeah. But there have been guys that, like I said, between Mike Martin and my father, just tremendous longevity, which gives you a chance to be really consistent and develop a program. And I had a little struggles after my father left. Jimbo took him to the national championship and left, but the next hire didn't pan out too well. So they're just now getting it back at Florida State with Mike Norvell. And I noticed that in baseball, they made him, I think Mike Martin's son got the job, didn't work out. The new guy, I think, they might be undefeated or have one loss this early in the baseball season at Florida State.
Yeah, and I think the new baseball coach is a Florida State alum, so he left Notre Dame to come lead Seminole baseball.
Yeah, he's like I said, he was a highly marketable guy. A lot of people wanted the guy at Notre Dame, and we'll get him away from the Catholics, get him down there with some Southern Baptist Christians down there in Panhandle, Florida.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So let's see. I see that your brother's still coaching their mid major team there in Louisiana, right?
Yeah, University of Louisiana Monroe, and what Terry did, when he left Auburn, he got out of coaching at 44 years old. So from 44 to about 54 is 10 years. He sat out, had a great studio job with ABC doing college football, So he really felt like once he got through with TV, he missed 10 years. So he's kind of going, he went back and trying to make up those 10 years that he lost, and had some success at North Alabama, then Akron, and now at ULM, University of Louisiana Monroe,
Right.
trying to win games.
Yeah, and it's I mean, just you talked a little bit about the Power Five schools and the NIL. I mean, ACC, SEC, Big 12, Pac 12, they have their own network. I mean, just Twitter with high school kids posting huddle highlights to get recruited. I mean, just technology has certainly expanded here with around the game of college football and recruiting nowadays.
Yeah, it really has. The social media has been a huge influence in the recruiting process. Used to
Right.
be you got a prospect on the home phone, then the cell phones and Twitter and TikTok and all the things, Instagram that you have to be able to communicate with them. And then the NIL and the daggone transfer portal has really taken college football some places it didn't need to go, shouldn't be at this point in time, and hopefully they can get it corrected before it ruins the sport. But social media has had its negative effects on college athletics as about as much as NIL and transfer portal.
Right. Well, hey, Coach Bowden, it was it was nice meeting you there on Super Bowl Sunday, and I appreciate your time for coming on my podcast and talking about your story here around the game of college football.
Well, I tell you what, I've enjoyed your show. You've asked some great questions, and I wish you the best of luck. But I think any coach that ought to, have an opportunity to get on and share some knowledge about college football would enjoy your show. So, wish you the best of luck.
Well, hey, I certainly appreciate it, and I grew up in a military family, so definitely was a big fan of your dad's. And when you came to be a head coach at Clemson and what you guys stood for on and off the field, so thanks
Well,
again.
I appreciate it. Hope you have a good weekend.
All right, talk to you later, and that's a wrap here for today's show.